All right, number one. So it looks to be a fill in the blank question, so let's read it. Mealbone play written is perhaps best known. A few examples of what in literature? Most they prefer working alone, and this cost Hurston and Huge their friendship. It's not hard to see why. So some they prefer working alone, but something bad happened, and there's it's not hard to see why. So they must have not worked alone, so they must have worked together. So I'd say just like maybe this was a collaboration in literature, like in songs, they do a collab and then read the choices. So characterization, interpretation. Oh, well, look at that. I would just say none of these work because this is directly talking about working alone, and it implies heavily that whatever they did ended poorly. And so now we see why writers work alone. So they must have not worked alone. They must have done it together. So it must have been a teamwork or team effort. So they must have collabed. All right, another fill in the blank. The process of mechanically recycling plastics is often considered blank because of the environmental impact and loss of material quality that often recurs. I would say just bad because people tend to not like environmental impacts and material quality and they're losing it. So I'd just say it was bad in general. Chemist Takunda developed a cleaner process. Okay. So which ones most are like bad? So that's the word I used. Resilient, inadequate seems to fit, look a lot more like bad. Dynamic than satisfactory. Well, this is the opposite. So I'm not say it's satisfactory. I wouldn't say it's resilient because there's a loss of material, so that's not resilient. Maybe if they kept the same amount. Inadequate looks like it'd be a great answer. And then dynamic means like changing. I can see how that's a trick question because she's changing it here, but I don't think that's the best answer, so I would stick with B. All right, number three is another fill in the blank. Let's read it from the top. Interruptions in supply chain for microchips. Retailers can expect robust growth in sales of those devices in the coming months, so they're growing in sales. The delays are unlikely to blank her projection entirely, but will almost certainly extend its time frame. So her projection is that the sales will grow, but they were unlikely to say like just contradict. I mean that's not the best word, but I would say make her projection false. It's not going to entirely, but it will extend the time frame. They're probably saying that the sales will grow still, but it might take a little bit longer because of the delays. So let's see which completes the text with the most logical and precise word or phrase. So dispute, I don't think it's going to disputes the best word. Withdraw her project. Delays are unlikely to withdraw her projection. Well, no, because she still said it. She's not going to take it back. Underscore her projection. I think invalidate is the best word because dispute. Yeah, I don't like A because dispute means that they would argue against, but the delays don't really have an opinion, so how are they going to argue against it? And then underscore because nothing really talks about how it will underscore the time frame or make it false. So I'll just take out C and we're left with D. All right, number four is another fill in the blank. Let's read it. So it's an art installation by Anthony Wu Tsang that critics found truly blank. They praised, so we know it's a positive word for creatively transforming a museum rotunda into a dynamic exhibit onto a massive 84-foot curtain, filling the space with sounds of his or her voices singing. So I would say truly impressive, maybe. It's a positive praise. It's creative. It's dynamic. It's clearly a massive 84-foot curtain filling space with sounds. It sounds pretty cool. So let's look at the answer choices. Restrained? Well, no, it doesn't sound very restrained. It's an 84-foot curtain filling space with sounds. Inventive? Well, maybe because it's creative, it's dynamic, so that could be plausible. Inexplicable, meaning it can't be explained. Well, they explained it pretty well here. They just described it to you. So I wouldn't say it's that. And then mystifying. unable to be understood. I still think B is the correct answer. It sounds like, once again, they understand it pretty well. They were able to describe it to us. So we're left with answer choice B. Okay, number three, another fill in the blank. Some scientists have suggested that mammals in the Mesozoic era were not very blank group. And he suggests that early mammals living in dinosaurs were an all ground dwelling. Fossils of various plant mammals have been found in China. Look like a flying squirrel. We're a not very, I would just think, well, he thinks they're all ground dwelling animals. So all of them, so maybe diverse would go there. Fossils of various plant eating mammals. Looks like they were flying. Oh. Well, if I knew a word for non flying, they were not a very flyy group. Maybe they don't fly. Maybe there's a fancy word for that. But let's look at the choices. Predatory. Predatory doesn't mention anything about them eating other people or other animals. Obscure. We're not a very obscure group. That doesn't really make sense because they knew about the animals. They knew that they were ground dwelling, and now they know they could fly, so they know a little bit about them. So not very obscure. Well, diverse. Well, shoot. I said that. I like that answer a lot. And then localized, meaning they're in one place. Well, I just don't think so. They never mentioned about where they live. So I would say D's out, and C is the only answer we have left. All right. This is a poem about street lamps in early spring. I always like to read the question that they want me so I know what to look for when I read the passage. Which choice best describes the overall structure of the text? Okay, well, let's read the text. Night wears a garment. So if night's wearing a garment, it's the personification of night. Velvet blue all over her face as she draws the veil. So night is the her in this text. And the black of her hair, subtle hands of night moving slowly with a dim starlight. So it sounds a lot like she's just describing nighttime, but using, human attributes like hair, veils that they wear, and hands, stuff like that. So I'm thinking human, and I'm thinking night. Nothing about street lamps though. So alternating descriptions of night in a rural area in a city. Well, they make no mention of whether it's rural or a city, so A's out. Images nightfall, then an image of a sunrise. I don't really see anything about sunrise, or really just it's not about images of nightfall. So I'm gonna say no to that one. Makes an extended comparison of night to a human being. Well, shoot, human, night. You can see it through the night wears, her face, her hair, hands. So I'm thinking C is the right answer, but let's finish it off. Portrays how night changes from one season of the year to the next. There's no mention of seasons. B, I didn't like it anyways, so C is the last answer left. All right, number 7. So it's asking us which choice best describes the function of the underlying portion of the text as a whole. So after reading the text, it's about a labor movement in World War II. And there's increased production quotas, meaning greater bargaining power for the employees who are Mexican American women. Then it talks about how the employees insisted on more favorable benefits and employers who were anxious to fulfill the contracts complied. So I guess this is just elaborating on what was stated before, where they had better bargaining power, and this would be an example of what they used that bargaining power for and how the companies were forced to comply. So, which choice best describes the function of that underlying sentence? It elaborates on a claim that about labor relationships in a particular industry made earlier in the text. I would say yeah, because it's elaborating on the fact they had greater bargaining power because it's giving an example of what they used it for. So, yep. A trend in World War II era discussed earlier in the text. I don't know how that was a trend. It's just more talking about Mexican American women and their contributions, not really a trend among World War II era. Possible exception to the historical narrative labor activism sketched earlier in the text. I don't know how it's an exception of anything. It's more agreeing that they contributed and therefore got more rights. So it's not really an exception. And then provides further details about the identities of the workers. Well, Nope, not talking about the identities of Mexican American women. It's just asking about what benefits they wanted. It's not elaborating on their personal identities at all. So we're left with answer A. Okay, number 8, read the question. Which choice best describes the function of the underlined sentence of the text as a whole? All right, so let's read it. It's about this man, John, sorry. And he was puzzling to everyone. He knew he was an imaginative child. So he was weird. Nobody understood him because he was so imaginative. All right, so it's talking about banks of the river. So this is describing the river over here. And he loved to wander down to the water's edge, throw in twigs, watch them sail away to Jacksonville, and he wanted to go with them. So this is what he did, and I guess it gives some insight about what he wants to do. So he wants to go to the wide world. He wants to follow them. So maybe he wants to leave. Who knows? Provide an extended description of a location. I don't think it's a description of the location. It's more what he did there rather than just giving another description because it did that pretty well. He described it pretty well there. Reveals why they are confused by his behavior. No, because it doesn't talk about what people think of him when he does this or that if anyone's watching him. It doesn't say anyone's looking at him when he does this. So I would say no for B. Uniqueness of John's imagination compared to the imaginations of other children. I would say no because it doesn't really compare it to any other children's imaginations here. It doesn't imply that it's weird either. So I would just say C's not supported. And then it would suggest that he longs to experience a larger life outside the Florida woods. Well, I would say D makes sense because, well, there's a wide world and he wants to follow it. And then if you took this out of the text, you actually wouldn't know that, but you do because it's in there. So it makes sense that it would suggest that. So D is the correct answer. All right, number 9. According to the text, what is true about Dorian? And then about Dorian Gray. He's looking at a portrait because they like to give you context up here. So he looked listlessly at his picture. Oh, he liked the way it looked. He recognized himself for the first time. He can't hear anything else. He's so focused on the picture. He thinks he's beautiful. Okay. So maybe he's never seen himself before and he thinks he looks great. Good for Dorian. It doesn't sound like he cares about Hallward's opinion because, well, he can't hear him. He's delighted about what he sees in the portrait. Yup. He definitely says that many times of pleasure, joy, his own beauty. He's never felt it before. He refers portraits to other types of paintings. No, they don't mention any other types of paintings throughout the text. And he's uncertain of Hallward's talent as an artist. Clearly, that's not true because he loves it. He's staring at it and he can't even hear Hallward. So yeah, B is the correct answer. All right, so we got a graph here, and it's going to ask us which choice best describes the data in the graph that support the author's claim. All right, let's find out. What is their claim? So they looked at factors that influence voter turnout in the US, and they found whether respondents voted in national elections and how knowledgeable they were about politics. And here's their claim. Claims that the likelihood of voting is driven in part by potential voters' confidence in their assessments of candidates, meaning informed the more informed a voter is about politics, the more confident they are at evaluating whether candidates share their views and therefore are more likely to vote. So, the more confident they feel, the better the assessment of the candidate, so they're more likely to vote. So, let's look. People with low information than people with high information. So, people with low information tend to vote less on average, no matter what they believe, people with high information vote more often or more likely to vote than people of low information. So let's see the answer choices. At each point on the political orientation scale, high information voters are more likely than, yep, I would say A is pretty good. Low information voters who identify as independents had a voting. Well, this is only talking about one type, and this is independents, and this is just talking about all voters. So I'd say B's out. The closer that low information voters are to the ends of the political orientation, the more likely they were to vote. Well, once again, we're talking about all voters, not voters at the ends of the political spectrum. And then high information voters were more likely to identify as Democrats or Republicans. Well, once again, we're just talking about info high and low information voters, not their political affiliation, like whether they're Republican or Democrat. So D is wrong. A is the only one only talking about how the amount of information the voter has influences their likelihood to vote. So I'd say the correct answer is A. All right, number 11, another graph. Which choice best describes the data from the graph that weaken the student's conclusion? So the graph should go against the student's conclusion. So let's read it. So spiders in two enclosures, one with lizards, one without. Track the number of spiders in the enclosure for 30 days. All right, this is what they included. They concluded that the reduction in the spider population count in the enclosure with lizards by day 30 was entirely attributable to the presence of lizards. So the spiders decreasing was solely because of the lizards. Well, let's find out why. Spider population count, no lizards, with lizards. So it looks like the graph supports it that in every case. Oh, okay. Well, the difference is the amount of lizards is also going down. So there could be an external factor making both populations decline. Spider population count was the same in both enclosures on day one. I don't think that weakens it at all. It's just irrelevant information. Although it's true, but it's irrelevant information for the guy's claim. Spider population count was also substantially declined by day 30 in the enclosure without lizards. Yeah, so something's making it decrease as well with or without the lizards. So B could be plausible because it does contradict that it's because of the lizards. Well, if it was solely because of the lizards, then why did the populations without lizards go down as well? Maybe not as much, but it went down still. So it could have been an external factor, like stated above. The largest decline in spider population count in the enclosure with lizards occurred from day 1 to day 10. No, because this has nothing to do with the lizards, more just the period of days in between. This has nothing to do with this claim. Spider population count on day 30 was lower in the enclosure with lizards than in the enclosure without lizards. Well, that supports this claim, so once again, D's out because we want to contradict the student's conclusion. We want to weaken it, and this supports it. So we're left with B as the correct answer. All right, number 12. So the first thing I'm going to do is read the question so I know what to look for when I read the paragraph. Which finding, if true, would support the team's conclusion? So I'm going to keep an eye out for the team's conclusion. Let me make a straighter line. Okay. They investigated the domestication of farm animals in China during Bronze Age. So they looked at the chemical composition, the bones. Okay, so here's what they determined. Wild plants made the bulk of their diet, sheep for sheep and goats, while cattle eat millet, which is a crop cultivated by humans. So they conclude that the cattle were likely raised closer to human settlements, while sheep and goats were allowed to roam further away. So this is their claim. And then what's going to support this claim? All right. So in analysis, the animal's bones showed that the cattle's diet also consisted of wheat, which humans wildly. Yes, because the cattle lived near humans, and if they ate food the humans ate, that means humans probably raised them, which supports their claim over here. So I would say yes to A. Further investigation of sheep and goats' bones revealed that their diets consist of small portions of millet. Well, this would go against it because this would imply that they lived near human settlements just like the cattle, which would go against their claim. So, nope. Cattle's diets generally require larger amounts of food and a greater variety of nutrients than do sheep's or goats. Well, this makes no sense because it doesn't support, but it also doesn't go against their claim. It kind of does neither, so it's kind of a that's still no. The diet of sheep, goats, and cattle were found to vary based on what the farmers in each Bronze Age settlement could grow. I would say once again that doesn't support it, but it also doesn't contradict it. So A is the best answer for 12. All right. So let's read the question. Which finding, if true, would most likely directly support their claim? All right. Mesosaurus, reptiles. So they looked at oxygen 18 isotopes for the dinosaur, calculate the body temp, and determined that they're endothermic. Okay, use internal metabolic processes to maintain stable body. So that's what it means. And this is their claim. So this is what we need to pay attention to. Endothermy would have enabled Mesosaurus to include relatively cold polar waters in their range. So they swam in the cold. That's their claim. So let's look at what would directly support their claim. All right. Their body temperature are easier to determine tooth enamel oxygen 18 isotope data than the body temperatures of. This has nothing to do with their claim. It's just what's easier to determine body temperatures for different dinosaurs. This has nothing to do with their claim. It is neither positive or negative, so we're just going to cross it out. Fossils of both mesosaurs and non-endothermic marine reptiles have been found in roughly equal numbers in regions near the poles, though in lower concentrations than elsewhere. Okay? Well, I don't think that B I think B contradicts their claim because it's saying that mosasaurs were endothermic, and these are saying non-endothermic reptiles were also found in the poles, and this would imply that it's the reason they were able to go to the poles was not because they were endothermic, which would go against the scientist's claim, so B's wrong. Several mosasaur fossils have been found in regions near the poles, okay? Few fossils of non-endothermic marine reptiles have been found in those locations. So this C is doing the opposite of B. So it's saying that mosasaurs went to the poles, and then non-endothermic marine reptiles were not able to do that. And this implies that mosasaurs were able to do it because they're endothermic, which would support the scientist's claim. So I'm thinking C. And let's finish it off. During the late Cretaceous, seawater temperatures were likely higher throughout the. I don't know what this has to do with their claim. They were never talking about seawater temperatures. Yeah. This is actually so go against it, saying that the water was warm near the poles. So yeah, C is the only answer. All right, number 14. So, what would most directly support the researchers' hypothesis? So let's find out what their hypothesis is. So they hypothesized that a decline in the dusky sharks led to a decline in the eastern oysters in this region. So this is their claim. Dusky sharks do not typically consume eastern oysters, but they do consume cow nose rays, and they eat oysters. And so this is their evidence, and this is the claim. So what would support the researchers' hypothesis? So this letter A is declines in the regional abundance of dusky sharks. Ray, other than cow nose rays, are associated with regional declines in dusky shark abundance. declines in the regional abundance of dusky sharks prey other than counter. This doesn't speak to dusky sharks' relationships to the oysters, so I would say no, it doesn't support their hypothesis. Eastern oyster abundance tends to be greater in areas with both dusky sharks and cownose rays. Well, that doesn't support it because shouldn't the abundance be less, not greater, when their predators are around, the cownose rays, and the dusky sharks that are supposed to eat the cownose rays? So B does not support it. Consumption of eastern oysters by cownose rays in the region substantially increased, okay, before the regional decline in dusky shark abundance began. Well, if it's before the decline, that doesn't support it because if it increased after the decline, maybe it could show that dusky sharks were not around to eat the cownose rays. But since it's saying before the decline, C is not correct. That doesn't support the claim. And then D, cownose rays have increased in regional abundance as dusky sharks have decreased in regional abundance. So yeah, what I said C should say is exactly what D is saying, that cownose rays have increased in abundance while dusky sharks have decreased because the sharks aren't around to eat the rays, and that supports their claim that the sharks eat the rays and the rays eat the oysters. So D is correct. All right. Number 15. Which finding from Washington, and we're just going to say M here, study if true would most likely directly weaken, okay, so we want to weaken the claim made by people who favored the traditional view of voter behavior. So we're going to cite a fact from a study, the finding from the study, to weaken the claim made by people who favor traditional views of voter behavior. So let's read it. Okay, so here's political science favored the traditional view. Here's what they claim. They claim that voting in an election does not change a voter's attitude towards the candidates in that election. So, focusing on each US presidential election, they tested this claim by distinguishing the subjects who have just become fully old enough to vote and otherwise similar subjects who were slightly too young to vote. And they compared the attitudes of the groups and subjects towards the winning candidate 2 years after each election. Okay, so this is just talking about the study and what they did, but it doesn't actually give me any evidence. So this is just the study, and this section is the claim. So let's read through the answer choices. All right, first one is A. Subjects' attitude towards the winning candidate 2 years after the given election were strongly predicted by the subject's general political orientation, regardless of whether they voted. So I don't think this supports or contradicts either claim, so I'm going to say it's out because it's more talking about the political orientation, not whether they voted or not showing difference between people who vote or not. B, subjects who were not old enough to vote in a given election held significantly more positive attitudes towards the winning candidate 2 years later than they held at the same time. I would say B, because it doesn't say the attitudes of people who did vote. So you're leaving the other half of the claim out, so that doesn't support or deny the claim. C, subjects who voted in given elections held significantly more polarized attitudes towards the winning candidate than subjects who were not old enough to vote. So I like this one because it contradicts the claim that voting has doesn't change the voters' attitude. Well, clearly it does because people who voted were more polarized than people who weren't. So C looks good, but we're going to finish it off with D. 2 years after the given election, subjects who voted and subjects who were not old enough to vote were significantly more likely to express negative attitudes. Well, once again, this doesn't show the contrast between voting and not voting. Oop, not voting. So it doesn't support nor go against the either claim. So D's out and C is the only answer that we have left. All right, number 16. So let's read the question before we dig in. Which choice best describes the data from the graph that support the conclusion? All right, so let's read the conclusion. P solar cells convert light into electricity more efficiently than other kinds of cells. and manufacturing advances recently have made them commercially attractive. One limitation of the cells, however, has to do with their electron transport layer, ETL. Okay, spin coding, fairly efficient at converting computing and power. Okay, so the team produced ETLs of various thickness and concluded, so this is now the conclusion, that the spray coating holds promise for improving the power conversion efficiency of ETLs in P solar cells. So let's go look at the graph. So this is the spray coating, this is spin coating, the lowest performing, and then this is the efficiency. So the ones with the coat were more efficient than ones without the spin. Oh, the ones with the spin coating were less efficient than the ones with the spray coating, and that's what the graph shows. So let's look at the answer choices. Okay, so both the ETL applied through spin coating and the ETL applied through spray coating showed a power conversion efficiency greater than 10%. I would say no, because this doesn't support that the spray works. So all they want to say is that the spray works. It makes it more efficient. That's supposed to say efficient. Um, the lowest performing ETL applied through the spray coating had a higher power conversion efficiency than the highest performing ETL applied through spin coating. Yeah, that's pretty good. We'll say, and it's true. So they could trick you and that not be true, but here you can see that it's true in the graph. The highest performing ETL applied through spray coating showed a power conversion efficiency of 13%, while the highest performing ETL through spin coating showed 11%. I would say this isn't true because it doesn't show 13%, it shows 17%. That's just not true. There was a substantial difference in power. It's trying to say what B said, but the information is wrong. There was a substantial difference in power conversion efficiency between the lowest and the highest performing ETLs applied through spray coating. Nope, because it doesn't show that whether it's better or not. There was a difference. It's true, but it's not supporting the claim. So B is the right answer. All right, number 17. So let's read the question first. Which finding, if true, would most likely directly support the journalist's claim? So we got to find the journalist's claim, and then we got to support it with A, B, C, or D. So let's read the passage. Okay, so we're talking about our man O.E. and Wazor. He likes African artists. Okay, and he sought to remedy this deficiency, and this is the claim right here, by not focusing solely on modern African artists, but showing how the work fits into the larger context of global modern art and art history. Okay, so he's doing two things. So he's talking about African artists. So he talks about African artists and he shows how their work it fits globally in modern art and art history. So that's his claim, and we got to support it with A, B, C, or D. So let's look at A. As a curator of Hansa Kunst and Munich, and was organized sculptors' work. And it was one of the largest art exhibitions devoted to a black artist in Europe's history. Well, he's a black artist, but it doesn't mention how it's an African artist. I guess it's Ghanaian, so I'm guessing that's Ghana. So maybe it does. But still, it's not global. It's really only in Germany. He's not comparing it to any other countries. So I wouldn't say A is the best answer for this. Let's move to B. In the exhibition post-war, and Wizard brought works by African artists such as MN together with major figures from other countries. Okay, so there's other countries and there's African artists and there's multiple African artists with the US and Mexico. So this is both global and mentions African artists, so AA. So I like B. B gets a stamp of approval, but we're going to check all the answers. We're going to look at C. So his work as a curator showed African movements for independence from European colonial powers, and it influenced other African artists. So I would say no to C because it does talk about African artists, but maybe it makes it seem global because they're talking about its relationship with European colonial powers, but really this is just talking about Africa's relationship not any other countries, and it's not comparing it to any other countries, so it's not very global. So I'm going to say no to that one. B is a much more likely answer. And then we're going to move to D, where he organized exhibition with African photographers to demonstrate broad range in which African artists approach the medium of photography. This is hard to know. Doesn't talk about any other countries, doesn't compare them to any other countries. It's not global, and it only talks about African artists in photography. So we're going to stick with B as the correct answer. All right, number 18. So it's testing us on our grammar. So for thousands of years, people in the Americas blank the bottle gourd, a large bit of fruit, thick rind to make bottles and other types of containers, and even musical instruments. Although there's no evidence that any type of bottle gourd is native. Okay, so we can just ignore the other half of this. So if you want to go through these a little quicker, just read the first sentence and see how it fits in it. So for thousands of years, people in America has blanked the bottle gourd. Okay, so looking at all these answers, we know that this is the subject in the main clause. So are the people in the Americas. So subject slash we have the main clause. And just looking at this, to use, have used, having used, using, I can tell that the main difference between all of these is finite and non-finite verbs. And a good rule is you cannot put a main clause next to a non-finite verb. You need a finite in order for it to be grammatically correct. And so an example of this is to use, have used, having used, using. So the only one that is finite is actually have used. I can tell the rest of these would be wrong. You can tell that these are infinite or non-finite because they have ing at the end. But this one is to use. That's a non-finite as well. So you know that B is the only answer choice left. And a good rule of thumb to see the difference between what is finite and what is non-finite is non-finite verbs can actually be used at the beginning of a sentence. So let's look at these. So to use a hammer, you must hold it. Okay, that can be used at the beginning of a sentence. But you can't say, have used a hammer, you must hold it, or have used anything. That just sounds weird. You can't use it at the beginning of the sentence, and that's why it's the finite. That is why, sorry, hold on. That is a finite verb. And then the rest of these, having used a hammer, I know how to hammer nails. Or using a hammer, you can hammer nails. These both can be used at the beginning of the sentence. And that's just a good way to tell what is non finite versus finite. All right, number 19. So it's testing our grammar. Is that even how you spell grammar? I don't know. While many video game creators strive to make their graphics even more, I guess, lifelike, others look to the past developing titles with visuals that inspire the 8-bit, yada yada yada. Okay, sweet. So even looking at this, I know this is a subordinate clause because it can't stand on its own. So subordinate clauses cannot stand on their own, can't stand on its own. And so what I mean by this is saying, while many video game creators strive to make their graphics look even more lifelike, imagine I put a period there and I just took it out of this paragraph and read it by itself. It would make no sense. You'd just be like, well, what do you mean? You have to finish it. You would feel that impulse. It cannot stand on its own. So while many video game creators strive to make their graphics look even more lifelike, you'd be like, well, what do you mean by that? It wouldn't make sense. So that's why it's a subordinate clause and it's right next to a main clause. So what a main clause is, a sentence that can stand on its own. So if I put a period here and I said, others look to the past, developing titles with visuals inspired by the 8-bit games of the 1980s and the 1990s. Yeah, that sentence is a beginning and an end. It can stand on its own. So we're looking at a subordinate clause and then a main clause. What is the punctuation you put in between? And so that's what it's asking. And so knowing this, I actually know that it's just a comma. You need something separating these. So immediately I'm taking out A and B because you need a piece. You need punctuation to separate a subordinate clause and a main clause. And so I think that we're between C and D. And so if I read it out loud, while many video game creators strive to make their past graphics look even more lifelike, but others look to the past developing titles, you don't need the but because you have the wow. So this is already implying that the others is different, that these are going to be two different ideas. You don't need the but to do that. So D's out and C is the only answer choice left. But once again, read that out loud. You should be able to see that that but is not needed. It would just sound funny if you read it out loud to yourself in your head. So C is the correct answer for this question. All right, number 20. And it's going to be grammar. How exciting. In the 1950s, a man named Joseph Krieger was struggling to keep his business alive when his sister advised him to repurpose the company's product, a non-toxic clay-like substance for removing soot from wallpaper as modeling putty for kids. In addition, blank selling the product under child-friendly name Play-Doh. Okay, sweet. So we're using suggested, suggest, had suggested, was suggesting. So key point is to look about how verbs were used in the sentence before it. So it was, so now we know it's in the past tense. When his sister advised him to repurpose the company's product, yada, yada, yada. Okay, so just reading it out loud in my head immediately, I think suggested is the best one. Zufall suggested selling product under child-friendly name Play-Doh. Yep. B is not correct because that is not past tense. Had suggested. Uh, Zufall had suggested selling the pro. In addition, Zufall had suggested. I wouldn't say that because if we're looking at this advised right here, we're usually going to use a verb similar to that. So I'd not use C. I would much rather use A. That makes sense in my head more, and it follows the grammar used previously to the sentence, and then was suggesting. In addition, Zufall was suggesting that. That's not correct because the past progressive verb was suggesting it's not consistent with the previous sentences used of advised. So no. So a lot of the times if they give you multiple past tense options, look to what was used before it, and that's going to give you some clear hints as to which one to choose. And so A is the correct answer. All right, number 21. Looks like it's going to be testing us on our grammar, so let's read it. Beatrix Potter is perhaps best known for writing and illustrating children's books such as Tales of Peter Rabbit. That's the main clause. That is a standalone sentence. But she also dedicated herself to mycology. Okay. The study of fungi producing more than 350 paintings. Okay. Sweet. So I know that's the main clause. These look like more supplementary phrases, I guess. Yeah, yeah. Okay. So they're supplementary phrases because they're just adding additional information to the main clause. So, but she also dedicated herself to mycology. Okay. And that's the study of fungi. All right. So there needs to be some sort of punctuation here. I just instinctually drew a comma because we need to end this idea because we're only talking about what mycology is. So if we kept it going without punctuation, that means this whole next rest of the sentence is just describing what mycology is, and that's not true. And the reason this sentence and this sentence are supplemental is because they're describing this is supplemental to mycology because it's describing mycology, and this is supplemental to the fact that she dedicated herself to mycology because this is just showing the extent to which she dedicated herself because she did 350 paintings of the fungal species and submitted research on spore germination to the Society of London. So we know that it's main clause and supplemental, supplemental. And so immediately I know B's out because you can't put a period there because it's discussing the sentence previous to it. And in addition, you just can't start it with producing 350 paintings she observed and submitting research in linen. That just sentence doesn't make sense. So B's out. I know you need punctuation in there, or else it would sound funny. And I know that's not how you can use a semicolon, so you wouldn't use that. So D is the only answer left. Number 22. So this is looking at our grammar again. And it looks like they want us to plug in this sentence. Okay. So, in assessing the films of the Japanese director Akira Kurosawa, blank missed this equally deep engagement with Japanese artistic traditions such as no theater. Okay. So, in assessing is our big hint here. So, what is assessing the films of Japanese director? So, we're going to be looking for the first part of this sentence to be relating back to what is assessing the films. So, let's look at the answer choices. So, we have A. So, in assessing the films, many critics have focused on Kurosawa's use of Western literary sources, but have missed this equally. Okay, this checks out because in assessing means many critics. So the critics were assessing the films. Okay, let's move to B. Kurosawa's use of Western literary sources has been the focus of many critics who. Okay, so in assessing the films of Japanese director Akira Kurosawa used. So it's implying she critiqued her own films, and so B's wrong. And then we're going to move to C. There are many critics who have focused on Kurosawa's use of Western literary sources, but they. Okay, so C is implying there, as in like there are many critics. So like the first noun, so this is going to be what's assessing the films. So they're assessing. That doesn't make sense. And this is a trick because it follows many critics, but that's just not how grammar works. It's just going to, that's called a dangling modifier. And so C is incorrect. And then D, the focus of many critics. So it's going to think the focus is assessing the films. So D is wrong too. And so if you're struggling with these, this is just going to be pattern recognition. You just got to know that if there's going to be a verb ending with ing at the beginning of this sentence, in assessing the films of Japanese director Akira Kurosawa, blank, the next noun, will be what is assessing it. So that's why, although they all may be saying the same thing, A is the correct answer. Okay, 23. It's testing our grammar once again. So Joshua Henson, director of the Language Revitalization Program, helped produce the world's first indigenous language instructional app, Chickasaw Basic in 2009, an online television network, Chickasaw TV in 2010. Okay, so this is a list. So this is a series. All right. So it looks like the way this is set up, he's going to say what it is and the year it was made. So a Rosetta Stone language course in Chickasaw in 2015. So I know this 2009 is going to relate to the first Chickasaw. So I'm going to assume that we're going to have a semicolon. The semicolon is going to come after 2009 because this should be included in the first idea. So A's out, B's out, and C and D are left. So now we're just arguing whether they need a semicolon or a comma. And looking at this, it looks like he uses a semicolon here to separate the ideas. So it's heavily implied that we're going to use a semicolon. So I think C is correct because we wouldn't be following what they did in the right after it. And so we're going to just keep the grammar all the same. So C is the correct answer. All right, number 24. So it's testing our grammar. So let's read it. 47 geothermal springs, source via process, more natural groundwater recharge, percolates downwards through the earth. Oop. All right, we got a dash there. In this case, the porous rock of the hills around the hot springs to collect in a subterranean basin. Well, my first instinct is to get that dash because we need to put, so if you have dash and then info, you need to put a dash after it. In addition, if you want to double check, let's just take out this information in between the dash and we could see it as in which the rainwater percolates downward through the earth to collect in a subterranean basin. This is what I'm trying to prove here is to say that this is a supplemental information. It doesn't have to be there. It's not integral to the sentence. So you can see that it should be in between both dashes, and that's why C is correct. Number 25, another grammar question. So we're looking at the use of a comma versus a colon versus including while. So over 20 years ago in a landmark experience, the psychology of choice professor Sheena I set up a jam tasting booth in a grocery store. The number of jams available for tasting varied. Some shoppers had 24 different options, others only six. So this looks like a main clause and a main clause because both some shoppers only had 24 options, other only six. That can stand by itself. And the sentence before it can stand by itself. So, I mean, I immediately like A because you can separate two main clauses with a colon. And the information in this clause kind of sets up the next one, but they're not dependent on each other. So that's what colon represents. But you can definitely not do that with a comma. So I do not support B. And if we added while in there, while some shoppers had 24 different options, others only six. That doesn't make sense. There should be a had either before or after the only for that to make sense because there's one here. So the while doesn't really make sense. Plus, you want it to be concise. So A is the best answer. All right, 26. It's testing our grammar again. So, Nigerian author B.E. celebrated literary over includes The Joys of Motherhood, a novel about the changing roles of a woman in 1950s Lagos. Okay. A Kind of Marriage, a television play about the private struggles of a newlywed couple. Okay, so immediately I'm seeing the punctuation already used, and that's going to be a big hint of what should we use now in our answer. So let's look at them. So 1950s Lagos, A Kind of Marriage. I like the punctuation. I'm against the comma because I'm seeing to separate the ideas. So this is separating a complex list. Looks like this is just a list, and we've seen this earlier in this same test. They asked us a question about it. So if you look at the punctuation that they use later, they're using a semicolon. So I only would want one with a semicolon separating the different ideas because this is a new idea. So you say Lagos, and then all of a sudden it's the next one in the list, and what they're using is this semicolon. So immediately A and C are out. And so now we're left with either no punctuation or a comma. But while we look here, they're using a comma to describe it afterwards to give that supplemental information. And they're going to do that here where it's Lagos, semicolon, A Kind of Marriage, comma, a television play about the private struggles of a newlywed couple in Nigeria, semicolon, and a head above water, again, a comma. So just looking at the grammar used in the list will give you a huge hint as to what the right answer would be. And so it's going to be B with the semicolon and the comma. All right, number 27. So we're asked to fill in the blank. So reading from the top, the novel talks about the divergent experiences of the young Nigerian couple after high school. So he moves to the United States to attend a prestigious university while she travels to London hoping to start a career there. Okay, so I'm assuming that these are happening at the same time. They're supposed to be compared with each other. However, frustrated with the lack of opportunities, he soon returns to Nigeria. Okay, so let's look at the answer choices. Which one completes the text with the most logical transition? I would say meanwhile. That looks good because it looks like that while one of them is attending the university, the other is looking for work in London at the same time. And so I would say meanwhile implying at the same time. So while one's going to the university, the other is traveling to London. So that's a very likely answer. I don't think B is correct because nevertheless, that kind of implies that she traveled to London in spite of whoever went to the prestigious university, but that doesn't seem to be the relationship between the two ideas, so B's not right. And then secondly doesn't really make sense because Yeah, secondly doesn't really make any sense here, so I'm going to say no. And then saying, in fact, Owens traveled to London hoping to start a career there. I that just isn't illogical. Doesn't make sense if you read it out loud. So meanwhile is the best answer. All right, 28. It's a fill in the blank, and we're looking for what completes the text in the most logical transition. So we have organisms have evolved a number of surprising adaptations to ensure their survival in adverse conditions. Tadpole shrimp embryos blank can pause development for over 10 years. Okay, well, this is an adaptation to increase their survival in adverse conditions, which would be the trout, and would increase their survival because they can pause their development so they won't die. So I would say this is an example. This supports, or at least this supports this statement above. Okay, so it wouldn't be in contrast because it supports this statement. Very likely would be for tadpole shrimp, for example, and then gives example of what is previously stated. And it's not meanwhile because it's not happening at the same time as organisms evolving. That doesn't make sense. And then consequently, well, this didn't cause this. This is just a statement, and this is an example. So D is wrong, and B is the only answer left. All right, number 29. All right, we're doing a logical transition question. So in 1933, the 20th Amendment, the Constitution was ratified. It mandates that presidential inaugurations are held on January 20th, 10 weeks after the November election. Blank, this amendment requires newly elected U.S. senators and representatives to be sworn to their respective offices January 3rd. Well, okay. I would say, yeah, in addition works best. That is because this is adding on to the amendment, discussing U.S. senators in addition to discussing that presidents have to be on January 20th. It wouldn't be instead this amendment because it doesn't imply anywhere above that. Yeah, I wouldn't say instead this amendment because it's not doing anything differently. And then, for instance, this amendment requires newly elected senators. Well, no, because we were only talking about presidents in the beginning. It's not for instance because you're not proving anything. And then, specifically, this amendment requires newly elected U.S. senators. That wouldn't work because it's not talking about specifically U.S. senators. It's talking about both the president and the U.S. senators. So that wouldn't make any sense. It would be in addition because you're adding information on top of whatever was already stated about the president. So D is the correct answer. All right. Number 30, we're doing a logical transition question. So inner poetry, Collectus Thomas and Blue, Rita Dove interweaves the titular characters' personal stories with broader historical narratives. Places Thomas's story from American South, the Midwest, contents the Great Migration. Okay. So blank Dove sets events from Beulah's personal life against the backdrop of the U.S. civil rights movement. All right, let's look at the answer choices. A uses specifically. So, specifically, Dove sets events for Beulah's personal life against the backdrop of the U.S. civil rights movement. It's not A. That doesn't make sense because specifically would mean that this has to deal with what was previously stated. So, Thomas's journey from the American South to the Midwest, specific in the larger contents of the Great Migration, specifically Dove. So these are two separate ideas. And so this is implying that this is a specific idea from Thomas's journey, which is not. It's a totally separate journey because it's Dove or Beulah's personal journey. So specifically is not correct. Thus is incorrect because it's saying that Beulah's personal life has to be against the backdrop of the U.S. civil rights movement because of something in Thomas's journey, and that's not true because it's not saying that it's a result or consequence of Thomas's journey. And saying regardless is doing the same thing where it's saying that regardless Dove sets events for Beulah's personal life against the backdrop of the US civil rights movement. That's implying, like, in spite of Thomas's journey being in the Midwest in the 1900s, Beulah's personal life is against the backdrop of the US civil rights movement. And then we can use similarly. Similarly makes sense because it is similar to Thomas's journey. It's in the same timeline against big movement. And so that would make sense because there are similarities in their journeys. They're unrelated, but they are more or less the same. So D is the correct answer. All right, number 31. So when looking at these, I love to read the question before so I know what to look for when I'm reading the bullet points. So they want to emphasize the distance covered by Philly and the Lancaster Turnpike. All right, and which one achieves this goal? So we're trying to look for the distance. So Philadelphia and Lancaster Turnpike Road was built. This is when it was built. It's the first turnpike. It connected P to P, and it was 62 miles long. So it looks like these two bullets will be important. So this emphasize the distance covered by the Philadelphia and the Lancaster Turnpike. Okay, so 62-mile long Philly Lancaster Turnpike connected these cities. Okay, that's pretty good. That talks only about the distance. It was the first turnpike. No, because that mentions nothing about the distance. Philadelphia connected two Pennsylvania cities and was built. Nope, doesn't talk enough about the distance to make A look bad, so C is gone. It's a historic road, and that's when it was completed. So this is the only one talking about the distance and the cities it connected, so A is the best answer choice. All right, number 32. I like to read the question before I start bullet points so I know what to look for. So she wants to emphasize the aim of the research study, okay, which uses information that supports her goal. All right. Well, what's the aim of the study? That's what we're going to be looking for. So, moon's oxygen comes from the sun via solar wind. That sounds cool. She wondered if some of the unaccounted for oxygen could be coming from Earth. So, saying moon's most but not all comes from the sun, but it could be coming from Earth. So he analyzed the data from the Japanese satellite. She gathered data about the gases, particles it encountered, and this is the data it gathered. Based off the data, she confirmed sufficient. Okay, so basically, moral of the story is moon's oxygen comes from sun, but not all of it. She thinks it could be coming from Earth. So she looked at data from a satellite, and the data gathered data about gases and particles while orbiting the moon, and they found that Earth is in fact sending oxygen to the moon. So, which she wants to emphasize the aim of the research study. So, which choice does that? As it orbited the moon, the Kaiga satellite collected data that was later analyzed. This does not support the aim, it just gives more information about the scientists. Before 2008, Kintara wondered if the moon was receiving some of its oxygen from Earth. No, I don't think it's B. This doesn't support or emphasize the aim. B doesn't really support or emphasize the aim, it just more talks about what she was curious about before the study. C is cosmochemist KT set out to determine whether some of the moon's oxygen was coming from the Earth. Well, that is the aim of the study. So it's not asking us to support the study, it's asking us the aim of the study. And the aim of the study was to find out whether Earth was sending oxygen to the moon. So, yes, this gets a check mark. And then KT study determined that Earth is sending a small amount of oxygen from the moon. This is more, D is really just restating the conclusion, not really the aim. And that's what they're asking for, specifically the aim. So C is the best answer. So, number 33. Let's read the question so I know what to look for in the bullet points. The student wants to present the study and its methodology, so how it was conducted, which uses relevant information to support this goal. So he wants to present the study and how they did it, not the conclusion, but rather the methodology. So let's look. Ducklings extend up to 62.8% less energy when swimming in a line behind their mother than when swimming alone. Physics behind this energy savings hasn't been understood. He used computer simulations. Okay, so this would be the methodology. This is how he did it. He used simulations from the duck's wake. Study revealed the ducklings were pushed in forward direction by the wake's waves. So this is kind of the conclusion. And he determined. Okay, so this is the methodology. This is how he did it. He looked at the wake, found this. This was the problem he was trying to solve. So he revealed that ducklings, which expend to 62.8% less energy when swimming in a line behind their mother, also experience 158%. Nope, this doesn't talk about the methodology, just the results. So that's wrong. Seeking to understand how ducklings swimming in a line behind their mother save energy, he used computer simulations to study the effect of the mother's. Yep, that's the methodology. I like B. ZY studied the physics behind the fact by being pushed forward in direction saved energy. It's kind of restating what B said, just with less information. And ZY discovered that ducklings are pushed forward in direction by the waves of their mother's wake. Nope. B is the correct answer because this is the only one that talks about what he did, the methodology, where the steps he took to find out the information. The rest are just kind of restating the results of the study. So B is going to be the correct answer.